Today we have Kate Meredith, who's going to tell us about the Sloan Digital Sky Survey projects. Take it away, Kate.
Hi, and thanks for coming tonight. And I'm just going to take you through the project on the Sloan here. And let me get up. We okay?
Yep. Yes.
And feel free, the two of you, to interrupt me at any time and ask questions. And I can't get a show on its own because it won't cooperate with my screen. So this is as big as you get for tonight. So if the refresh gets slow, let me know. I'll slow down a little bit. But I've had the great fortune in the last year and a half to get the chance to rewrite the Sky Server projects that have been on Sky Server for a number of years. And for those who are going to be listening to this recording later, Meredith said that he has had lots of experience with Sky Server, but the original Sky Server projects were written to utilize the Sloan Digital Sky Survey database, images and data, and put them into the high school. And this was a chance to learn science using the database materials, but they also did use, you had to go to Excel, you had to know Excel, and they had, so there were some weaknesses with the materials, but they had a lot of longevity over the years. They have good data about how the site has been used over the years, and even after professional development with the site, they had a really steady group of core users out there. Why they decided, well, it was time to update them using the new data that was available from Sloan. I'm going to exit out of this for just a second and just go out to Sloan here. I'll drag this over. So the website that we're talking about is the Sky Server Education pages. And on the Sky Server Education, so what I was showing you were some of the tools that were there, and Artis is familiar with these if he's been into this site over the years, but for those of people who might be listening later, I'll just quickly show you. The Navigate tool is one of the visual tools on Sky Server that allows you to go in and plug in your RA index, and you can even put in, M objects. I know that you can, if it's in the database, it will show up in Sky Server, and it will resolve the RA index for that object, and then you can get the image and you can actually see it in Sky Server. You can zoom out, you can pan around the sky, and you can see what kinds of data Sky Server has available for us. You can see around these very bright objects that they do things like masking, and so this is just a quick example of what's here. Part of what the lessons try and do is explain to you, why does the image look like this? Where do we have image data? Where do we have spectral data? And things like that. So let's go back here. And there's also a tool, I can click on some. There's also another tool in here called the Explore tool. And the Explore tool provides you with the same access to information that astronomers would have. And on some of the newer images where you have spectra, there'll be links to the new spectral tools and lots of different things to manipulate data from. So one of the things that we were doing was taking these materials and updating them. I'm going to go back here to the Sky Server page, and the educational lessons that were originally on the Sky Server were good lessons, but they are not up to date with what we would like to see happening in classrooms. So, for example, if you're taking a look at an activity that deals with the Hubble diagram, you get the Hubble diagram explained to you and the history behind how Hubble made the discoveries that he did, and then you go out and find proof that that is true, or the evidence of this, and you you get to explore the phenomena that has been explained to you. And now we are trying to change our approach. And I'm going to go back here for a moment to my slide presentation, because one of the things that's really driving the changes that we've made on this site are the next generation science standards. And moment. Okay. So we are looking at what are the major pressures that are out there, and we helped focus groups, teachers who were regular users of this material, and said, what do you need and what are you coming up against? And this is what they told us. And so we tried to keep in mind where we were in the whole process of the changing science standards in the United States. And so we were coming into this rewrite process about the time the new framework came out, and now we're right on the cusp where this last summer they released the new science standards. So we're trying to take into account the new, the increasing diversity that we're seeing in our classrooms and the pressure to move toward the next generation science standards and restructure these lessons so that they include engineering standards, core math and reading standards, and as well as really look at the inquiry-based part of the science curriculum. So what we have looked at, one of the things that I was really struck by was how much more we really know about what inquiry-based education looks like. And I'm going to come back to that in terms of the example about the Hubble diagram from the old site, just to do a demonstration of how we change these lessons. And then the strands of this, that all that we're trying to do in science now needs to be in terms of performance excellence. What can students do? And I'm really excited about this in terms of what it will mean for science if we get our assessments in line with what we know to be good instructional science. So this will really drive us to get things in our classrooms that we really wanted to do, longer-term projects, deeper thinking. Can we do science? All the things that NITARP does and things that we really enjoy doing in our class that we need more time and basically the permission to do them. And then when that shows up in the assessment, we'll really have that. That remains to be seen, and I'm crossing my fingers. So with a lot of emphasis on engineering, and we'll talk about what we're trying to do on the site with that, and making it sure that the practices of these fields are obvious. So how did we translate this into the site? We moved from having discrete lessons where you go in and you do something to having a variety of things. So I'm looking at a classroom that may have a couple of different languages. Students are particularly brilliant, but may have issues with communication, or we have, a different motivation levels. We have students who need that third credit of science, but are not as motivated as other students. We want to be able to accommodate everyone from the high motivating, high math ability students all the way across the board. So our design looks like ground control is where we're putting all the teacher material. And then we've got the help section, which are all the old help sections that were on the old SkyServer site, explaining how to use all the tools, except now those tools are explained in terms of why would a scientist want to use this? What is it in plain English, and why is it useful? Now, the core of the lessons are in terms of pre-flight, launch, and expeditions. So pre-flight, these are your skill-based activities that tell you, you just need to know this. It's like you've got a school. This is a skill. This is content. We are delivering content that you want to be proficient at. We try and make these very short. A launch activity is a chance to explain a particular concept or phenomena in astronomy or astrophysics that is inquiry-based. And this is where I've run into the most challenges, is trying to translate things into an inquiry-based lesson. And these should take you about 1 to 3 class periods, and these are all SDSS specific. If we can't do them within the SDSS database, we're going to send you someplace else to get that. And then finally, one of my real dreams from back in the days when I did the RIBSI program and down at down at in Tucson, and then through NITARP, was how do we allow classrooms to access real research-based education without killing the teacher, and without having the concepts and the technology move ahead of the pace of them. So I don't want to provide the scaffolding so the teacher doesn't have to become an expert in the field in order to help students conduct actual research. And that is the idea behind the expeditions. The expeditions are, I'm hoping, will provide scaffolding and thoughtful inquiry so that students can branch off and ask their own questions in the database. And these are longer-term projects. So this slide just gives you kind of the overall structure of where we're going. Now I'm going to show you in just a minute that we have designed a site that will be living on the Johns Hopkins servers, and it is just starting its translation period now. I have a test site up, which we'll be spending most of our time on here. And then I'm also hoping, should we be able to secure the funding, that this will be a place where we're able to put other resources from not just formal education, but grab a lot of things from the Sloan Digital Sky Survey, which is now a very diverse survey. It has a lot of different missions involved, rolled into one survey, and provide a lot of different at a lot of different levels. So there's other like to roll into this as well. So with that, I'm going to skip over to the site and show you what we've got here. Okay, so over here, let me see if we've got. Okay, so this is the part of the site that we have up on the JHU servers now, and I'm just going to give you an idea of what the design will end up looking like. Some of the text on this page will change, but this is what the permanent site will basically look like. And let me go back here. And then, so we've got our ground control pre-flight training is divided into different sections where we're going to be anything associated with locating objects or understanding light or capturing or recording the light are in different sections here, and I'll go over those in a minute. Our launch section, one of the things that I've really tried to do with launch is to embed that idea that there is a structure to the universe, and that when we're looking at items in a database, we're really talking about a location in the universe, not just a bunch of numbers, but we're either talking about something that's specifically located on a computer here on Earth, or we are looking at data that has to do with something in the solar system. So we're looking at planets or asteroids within SDSS, or we're looking out into a little farther out. We're looking at any stars or clusters that we look at in the database. We're in our Milky Way galaxy. And then finally, the strength of SDSS is looking extragalactic and looking out into the cosmos. So I want somehow to continually stress students that the scale and structure of the universe, for them to be grounded. I'd like this page ultimately to have some real graphics on here so that are continually dictating that increase of distance and where things are organized in the universe. And then we have our expedition activity. Where are you going to head your expedition to? Are you going to talking about the expanding universe, stars, look back times, what, and then our help section. So I'm going to go over to test site now. So everything from here on out isn't going to look as pretty, but it's at least all there, and I've been really grateful to have a test site to work on. Because then I get things together, and then somebody who really knows web design can make it look better. Okay, so any questions so far? Oh, okay. So let me see, where do I like to start? Let me give you a taste of pre-flight. So pre-flight training, let's say we want to go in and just understand, one of the things that we're doing here is I want to have pieces in here that talk about engineering. So when you search in the SDSS database, you need to use the structured query language. And for the most part, I teach SQL in a number of different activities, but it's done via the immersion method. You have a need, you're going to structure a query, this is how we do it, here's an example. Now you need to modify it in order to get it to work for a lesson. However, in pre-flight, I want there to be available just an explanation of what simply is structured query language. And you can see this is very short, and this is, you're reading this carefully, I just wrote this yesterday. So my procedure in writing stuff is I write it, I send it to a scientist, they fix any mistakes I have on it, I rewrite it or fix it again, I let it sit for a little while, I go back in and fix up some of the language, I send it off to a grammar guru, and finally off to somebody to test it in a classroom. So this is at stage one of that process, just in case you're reading along and you find something hideously glaringly bad. One of the things that I want to have as part of pre-flight, because this is skill-based, is I want these to have embedded quiz. And so that's something that I'm hoping will happen once we get funding for the next round of the Sloan. We need to have programmer time, which we haven't. And I'd like this to have some embedded quizzes because this is simply skill-based. Here's data, here's some pieces that I want you to understand on here. I'm looking for a particular one here to show off to you. Let's see, we've got spectra. Okay, so we're also trying to denote on here, get some idea of what level we're working at. So STARS is, I'm thinking this is a high school level piece of information. The one thing I don't want people to get in the habit of thinking of is that pre-flight is your lower level, launch is intermediate, and expedition is upper level. I would ultimately like there to be pieces of information or activities within under those categories that span from middle school up to Astronomy 101 at the college level. This is talking about the purpose of the activity, not that we reserve higher level thinking skills for just college and high school students. Okay, so I'm trying to start communicating a little bit about what level I'm shooting for here. So we always use SDSS spectra. We teach a particular concept, and then we are trying to build in some new tools so that students can test their own knowledge and get information as they go along here. And we have a few built-in animations that we can borrow different places, and there's some on the old websites that we'd be able to transfer in. And so we're teaching about the difference between absorption and emission lines, which I knew that's part of what, when I was in NITARP, that I used the Sloan for, was to teach some of the basic topic skills to my group. Add grounding in something that was pretty easy to get around in. Okay, that's the flavor of a pre-flight. Now, one of the things that the launch, get into more of the concepts. And one thing I want to show you here, let's see, Launch into the Cosmos has galaxy activities. And one of the things we're trying to do in here is also take advantage of other tools that are out there. So Galaxy Zoo in the Zooniverse uses Sloan data. So whenever possible, we're using Galaxy. So Galaxy Zoo has a tool called Navigator, which allows you to make a group, a classroom group. So you create a group, you get delivered to you a URL, you give that URL to your students, and they can classify galaxies in a group. And then you can go back and actually use tools that are there to create graphs. It avoids the use of having to go out and teach Excel. You have got data, some metadata about your galaxies, you've classified their shapes, but you also have available their magnitudes, their absolute brightnesses. There's various pieces of data that you have and that you can create graphs with. For this activity, now this is an example of how we're changing our approach here. The old activity, which I showed you at the beginning of the presentation, was the Hubble diagram. Great activity, but now I don't say Hubble diagram anywhere, but that's what this activity is all about. What are we looking at? We're first going to encounter the phenomena that galaxies come in many different shapes, and that they and that we can categorize them, that they can make patterns out of them. What can we do with this? and we can discuss these patterns. And as we go along, also and every time you see one of these goofy little pencils, that's an indication that there's something to record. My ultimate dream is that there would be an online notebook to do with this, but until then, what you will have available is either a teacher can download the Word file and adjust the lesson as they would like to, or you can simply run off the PDF file and have students fill in their own journals so that you have documentation for progress through here. So there's some questions that they will need to answer as they go through here, and things they will need to print off for this activity. And then once you're done with this, once you're done with this galaxy shape activity, what you've done is you've categorized, you've shared with your group, you have run off some black and white inverted images of the galaxies, and you've made your own sorting. Anytime that I think that a student might run into some problems with doing something, I created a short video to explain how to do this. One thing you'll find different from the others is that I'm hoping that I've tried to cover a lot of the support so that you won't necessarily have to go through this lockstep as a group in order for people to understand it. There'd be opportunities for students to shoot ahead or to get extra assistance particularly in terms of video assistance if they get stuck with things. So once you've organized that, then you can move on to the next piece. And I'm trying to figure out a way, I've got somebody on this job to figure out a way, the teacher, to provide a code before the next page is available. Because the next page actually does finally get around to saying, well, and Edwin Hubble also did the same job, and what do you think? The next piece of this investigation is taking a look at the classification system carefully and comparing some organizational diagrams, given that we've got a lot of more powerful technology looking at the problem now. How does differing technologies over the years change the questions we're able to ask, and how does it affect the scientific process? One of the things that's embedded in all of these activities is an emphasis on change of technology allows for us to go back and question existing theory, and does our new evidence support that theory, or does it cause us to expand or change or modify our theories? That's the structure of how all of the launch activities will be done. I'll give you a look at one other one that I like. This one's actually been looked at by a couple of teachers and modified already. The same thing with star color. Instead of telling you how to calculate star color or what color, as far as the subtraction of the light, the magnitude from two filters, instead of ever explaining that, first you have to go through and encounter brightness. You have to look for some patterns, and as you can see, I need a lot of video support to get this done. And you finally get to the point where you've taken a look at the fact that you have two stars of the same, with the same magnitude and the same filters that don't look at all the same. They've already gathered some data to this, and then what do we do with this information? What does this tell us about color? And that also with this activity, we haven't had to get into the actual logarithmic whole calculation of color. It keeps this at what I hope is a reasonably accessible level for all students. But if you want to go one step higher, that's available to you as well. So that's another example of a launch activity. Let's see if I've got anything in. That's about. The next thing I want to show is the next extension of this would be to take a look at expeditions. Now, in expeditions, I'm going to start with the galaxies. I'm experimenting with a couple of different ways to do expeditions because I really don't know. And I don't see a lot of good help out there as to how to provide the kind of scaffolding I'm looking for people to really support scientific reasoning, independent questioning, and research skills within an all-class type of situation. So what I did on this version of an expedition was to ask students to first take an inventory. Now, this expedition is assuming you've had some experiences already with astronomy. You're not going to jump into this, first thing. You've already had some experiences, you've gathered some skills, and it asks you to start by taking an inventory of what you know, and in real specific ways that I took a clue from a lot of the research that's out there already about what we can do to support student learning in this area. And I'm sorry, this is loading very slowly right now, but what you would be seeing here, if it would load a little faster, is a list of questions of students asking students to tell me what they already know, how do they know it, what's their reasoning, and what other tools do they have out there, where do they find them, what is out in the database, like the Navigate tool or Explore, what pieces of information are there, and how do you access those pieces of information. So to make those things very explicit, it's right in front of them. And what kind of questions can you ask from that? And from that inventory, what I want to provide is several different, this took me a while, I hope you're seeing this, this is like about my one piece of programming here, making these letters fly together. Okay, now that I've shown off my one flashy thing I have on this website, what I want this to provide is that students would be able to go in and then choose, based upon their inventory, from one of, say, 4 galaxy explorations. They would say, given, and I'm not sure if you can read it from where you're sitting, the checklist. So on the checklist for galaxy color, I have questions about colors we observed in galaxies. I'm familiar with the Hubble tuning fork diagram. I understand magnitude scale and how to use it along with filters to define the color of objects. And then it has a recommendation that you've completed the launch to galaxy shapes. And so when you go into this, so if you choose to do this exploration, then first step is you're going to colorize the Hubble tuning fork diagram and see if that changes things. So now we're introducing the idea that we now have one more tool to us that Hubble didn't have. We're able to define color of these galaxies. And does that change what we know? And we talked a little bit about in the last activity about Hubble thinking this was an evolutionary sequence. Well, does the evidence now support that, given our new abilities to see farther, to see color, is that supported? And so this is also an example of how we teach structural query language kind of in an embedded way. We provide a query to start with, we explain the pieces, but in order to do this activity, you must modify this query for your particular location. One of the things that's an absolute must when I design every one of these activities is everyone goes out to a unique place in the database. And there's activities in here already that support going out and finding a unique star, taking ownership of sky. And my own personal experience, and I'd love to see this backed up by some research sometime, that students, when they take ownership of a particular region of the database, when they look in Navigate tool and they find a galaxy and they're in their own little spot, their own RA and deck, and in this area there's this really cool spiral, and I found that this merging galaxy, that their motivation to go back to that spot, ask more questions, is amazing. And I'm just totally dedicated towards everyone. When you've got a 230 million object database with galaxies alone, no one should be looking for the same data. And that opens up the classroom to more. So in order to provide that, they take the query information, and I'd like to figure out a way where there's not, on this page, not quite so much reading to be done, but here it is. And you go to the query, and then we're also able, this will be on the other website where you can run the query right from the page. And that's beyond the programming of Adobe News. So I just put the link in so that when they transfer this spot, they'll know to put that query box in there. And so we'll be able to run the query right from the site, and then they can also sort things in the image list tool, and information about that. If you're not familiar with image list, it returns the query in terms of thumbnails, images of the target object for a particular ARIA deck. So that information on how to do that is there. And what happens after you've done this particular piece and you go on, you now have enough information under your belt about color and its relationship with galaxies to start asking a question. And what the final step in this exploration is to actually walk someone through the process of developing their own question. Everybody in this particular expedition will be asking a question, as it says here, about something about the color and the shape of their galaxy. But it can be anything in there. And really, there's a lot of questions available. And we guide them through developing a good question that's answerable and empirical, that you do some background research, although that can be truncated depending upon your class time, and that you're going to write a hypothesis that identifies the variables in your question. You're going to describe your procedures and how to do that, and this is all covered as well in the documented in their student journal, which the link for is at the top of the page. And then you plan your procedures, write your conclusions, discuss your findings, etc. And this is where I had sent out the call for, oh, wouldn't it be cool if I can have students, a couple videos embedded in here of students who have done poster sessions at AAS with the NITARP program or any other undergraduate program or student program, so that they can explain what a poster is, because I think, frankly, prior to NITARP, I didn't really know what a poster session was. So I think this is great territory to have them in. And so that is generally where we're going with expeditions. I have one other format for expeditions that I tried out, and that's Expanding Universe. And the Expanding Universe really is a walkthrough of how do we know that our universe is expanding. There really wasn't a very good way to make this genuinely investigative. And so I decided to write a historical walkthrough. And one of the things that we did on this, though, that I think is very important is this is where I talked about the differentiation. You can choose to have your students start at step 1, step 2, or step 3. They all start at step 1, and the skills are repeated in each one of these steps. So if you have a group of students who do not get farther than step 1, but get the skills out that they need, then that's great. Or you can do it any number of different ways. It doesn't block you into saying there's no closure, there's no benefit unless you can get the whole thing. And then what I've seen when I've tried to do some projects is that some students are rushed through the process and it becomes a large jumble and it's meaningless. And then I would much rather have them accomplish one set of goals thoroughly and before going on. So we divided the whole idea of the expanding universe into steps. First of all, understanding that there are other galaxies outside our own, and how do we know that? And so that's one step of the process. And that's using, and this is a really large group activity where they're actually sampling across the sky where the phone has imaged and take a look at isotropic homogeneity in the distribution of galaxies and stars versus stars. So what that tell us about where our stars and where our galaxies. And then galaxies are really far away. How are we going to get a relative distance on this? And finally, we go on. Step 2, we take a look at clusters. So we're not able to have a huge diversity in groups, but there's enough different data here to know that you can have your groups working at different levels. And you can either have them go in and grab all their own data, or I've grabbed all the data for them if you want to go and make this a little shorter activity. Some of the data, I have it available so that you can jump in without having to do all of the data processing. So I've got that kind of sitting off to the side if your students need that. The images are already there for them. And then just step through how to do what you need to do in order to assign a relative distance to the clusters, and how did that affect deciding how big the universe is, or that the universe is actually expanding. Last one was actually at going and looking at the Hubble-Humason original and construct your own Hubble diagram. And I think that is really what I wanted to get across to you today, and to also show you that right now we'll have pieces, every tool in the that's available on the Sky server explained, and what we try and do is make sure that it's really easy for you to go and understand what the tool is, how it's, why someone would care about that tool, and how tools cooperate with. And so everything for Navigate, Quick Look, and Explore are finished. There is the Science Archive server that has some very great tools on it that have very little or no even science documentation on them. So I have to really tackle yet, and some sample SQL queries. And we've decided not to do a glossary, so that's getting pulled out of here. We may do that should we someone bestow large quantities of funding on it for the project. I've got dreams of having, following Vivian Hetty's footsteps and making a glossary that's translated into, either a couple different languages and American Sign Language, and some experimentation with that. There's a lot of things that we can do in terms of accessibility. I've got accessibility ideas too, as far as making at least the pre-flight trainings written at maybe at least a sec level. So there's some things in the works that we'd like to look at in terms of accessibility and just rounding out the site in general. But that's what we have so far.
That is so cool. Thank you so much, Kate.
Okay. Any questions?
Kate, I have a question about, I know you said that one of the future ideas would be to have a student online notebook.
Oh, yeah.
You also mentioned when you were talking a while ago to go up there and put it in the notebook. Is there an online notebook tool at all right now?
No. In fact, here this one, I've got to get the notebook up. This one, let me find it, one that has the notebook. Oh, yeah, the pre-flight trainings have no notebook with them. The idea for those would be, I would like to see embedded quizzes with those, but all of the launch activities and the expeditions have student journals with them. So either you can take this and run off the PDF, and that's going to be your notebook for now, or you can take the Word document and, as a teacher, change it whatever way you want to make it fit what you're doing in your class. Ideally, what I'd really, I have, in fact, we've run focus groups on this, and I've done enough work. I know what I would want, and I know how we can even do it, piggybacking off of Evernote, borrowing other people's technologies, but it still is going to take us leveraging quite a bit of funding to get a really a good online notebook together. So
okay, and then the second question I have really kind of maybe dovetails into this, and that is, if they're collecting data that has to be graphed, I know one of the things you said in your introduction is that you would not have to be using tools like Excel, but how would they graph it?
Okay, so here's what, I'm glad you asked that, because I intended on telling you this, but I got caught up. So as part of the Zooniverse, there are tools, there are zoo tools, and they're available, and what zoo tools allow you to do is to import data from either, let's say you're let's say you're into up in a Galaxy Zoo here, and I have a profile, and I've collected my group of galaxies, and I can send these galaxies that I've collected. I can make different collections here. And most of the galaxies in Galaxy Zoo are from the Sloan Digital Sky Survey. There's quite a few Hubbles, but a lot more Sloan images. So anything that's a Sloan image can be accessed through a zoo tool. So you can send these over to these tools, and you can create a table. Okay, so you can import this data into here, and I'm not going to go through exactly how to do this right now, but I can import my collection of galaxies into this tool, and then I can stack these tools together. I can even see, I can create a map of where these tools, galaxies are in the universe. And they are right. Scan around the sky, and yeah, they're usually marked. Thought I had this all set up for you, but there should be a little mark as to where, if I want to map these, where the my galaxies came from in the sky, and then I can make tables. I can create different columns in my tables to calculate different things, and then I can create graphs out of this. So under Tools, I can do a scatter plot or a histogram of my object. So I can say I want to make a histogram, and I'm going to use the information that came from Sky Server 1, and I want my axes. I can, okay, so much for testing this before I started. Let's see. Okay, there we go. Now our metadata is showing up. I would like to see, and what I would, I can take a look at, I should have made a column for color here, but let's just do redshift, and I can do, I just take a look at the distribution of my object and according to redshift, but I can also create a scatter plot. So I'm going to select where my data came from, and then I can select what I'd like to have on my axes. And what would have been good is if on the table I would have done color or something else, but let's just take redshift and absolute magnitude in R, and then I can create a scatter plot with my information. So there's, go away, there you go. And so it will create your graphs for you. You can also make a color magnitude diagram, although I think this tool might be a little funky right now because I wasn't able to get it to work quite right this morning. But you can get your objects plotted on a color magnitude diagram as well. So my big hope, and we haven't done, the other thing we can do here is we can import data we can plug in an SQL query into these tools and have it pull from SkyServer. You can provided the tables are talking properly. So that's the one kink I've got to get out of here yet. So this is these tools are my big hope for avoiding Excel spreadsheets for a little while, is just to be able to do simple things like that. Also, the Galaxy Zoo tools, if you're looking at doing fairly straightforward graphing, if you're into the Navigator tool, and this you just have to create accounts for, I've got quite a few here that I can show you. So you can create a group, have them classify, and then you can go to graph data, and your group, you can take your group's data and you can create scatter plots and histograms from your group's data. What I like about this is that they've set this up so that it's always explaining to the students what they're making. They're making a graph so that they see how something relates to something else, and they can compare. They do a lot of different sample sizes. They can compare their data to how the rest of the people in Galaxy Zoo have. I went hit. I'm sorry. Cannot talk fast. Try this. Again. So you can compare what you've done to other groups, to Galaxy Zoo. There. And you can reset these on the fly. You can take pictures of them. You can download the data, and it gives you some information about the graph. So those are some of the things that I'm doing now to avoid having to go out Excel spreadsheets. Once you get to expedition activities, all bets are off. But I'm so far, that's my hope, is that we can keep going on this trajectory as better and better at having different tools from different projects talk to one another that we will continue to be able to build things that make it easy for you to get patterns you want to see. Does that help?
I think so.
So no, some of these things are not finished yet. I mean, I've got you've got pieces of the one, I've got an activity that uses Navigator, and I'm working on one now that uses the zoo tools, but I've got some kinks to get.
Okay, so what you're saying is that, for instance, we've been looking primarily tonight at galaxies, and I don't know what your other sections are, but let's say I'm trying to plot something about solar system objects. Can you use zoo tools to do that, or is it only specific to what's in, like,
right
galaxies?
now it's only what's specific to Sloan, and Sloan has got some things with asteroids. They have very few planet images, and the strength of Sloan is definitely stars and galaxies.
Right. My question is more of the nature of, does the tool transfer? So what you're saying is, if you were doing galaxies that weren't, let's say you pulled up galaxies that weren't SDSS galaxies, can you plot them using these tools?
Not in Navigator. I think that some of them, as long as we've got the data to go with them, if, you know what, Hubble doesn't give us a lot of extra data, so it just depends on what data we're getting from whatever source we got. All the Sloan stuff, yes. After that, it gets kind of sketchy, and I haven't tested out what works and what doesn't with the zoo tools for other data sources.
Okay.
I think but I do know that you can import, all of the images if it's part, put it in a collection in Galaxy Zoo, and get it over to Zoo Tools. But how much of the graphing, abilities will be available once you get there, I'm not sure.
There's increasing numbers of really interesting graphing tools and things like that. There was a very interesting talk at the AAS about some of these tools, which I haven't explored in detail because, in part, IPAC has been developing some tools of their own. So I was planning a future NITARP tutorial on some of the latest IPAC tools that involve graphing and things like that.
Oh, that'd be awesome.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Kate, for this.
Okay,
Yeah.
well, I am, interested in, I'm hoping that people will get a hold of this video and then say, what'd you build? Because I really can, between now and June, act as the astronomy good fairy. If you say, well, I need an activity that does this, and if I can do it, I'll produce it, because I've only got a limited amount of time for sure funding left, and so I'd just love to build what you really want.
Well, I know myself, I'm very interested in spectra and spectral analysis. I know we didn't have much time to look at your spectral tools, but that's one area that I'd like to explore.
Okay, why don't you send me your email address, and I will get you, I'll at least get you into the test site. I update the test site, a couple of times a week, and you can always get in there. It's not necessarily pretty, but you can play with the text and the content that's there. Because I think I've spent so much time teaching spectra that that's one place I feel pretty confident that we've got good explanations and some good